Unpicked crops are now left unharvested. Livestock were left untended, and rural economies are on edge.
Have you ever seen an entire harvest left untouched? In Texas, melon fields are rotting under the sun. In California, rows of leafy greens have sat too long past harvest untouched, forgotten in the fields. Not because of bad seeds, not because of drought, but because there are no hands left to work and no market left to sell. According to the latest USDA report, in just the first half of 2025, over 88% of key crops once exported to China, Southeast Asia, and Africa failed to reach buyers. The land is still there, the tractors still idle nearby, but the harvest is already lost. And in that silence, even those who once cheered for tighter restrictions are beginning to speak out. Because when food is left in the field, this is no longer just a farmer's problem. This is America's problem. Harvest without hands, the labor crisis no one saw coming. In Starr County, Texas, right along the Mexican border, watermelons are splitting open under 110-degree heat. The drip irrigation system keeps running because the farm can't just shut it off mid-season. The problem, no one showed up to harvest. And this isn't some isolated case. According to a May 2025 report from the Texas Farm Bureau, more than 28% of the state's farm workforce simply vanished, many too afraid of immigration raids to return. The recent surge in ICE enforcement across agricultural regions from the Midwest to the South has driven out thousands of workers, including those legally employed on H-2A visas, who are stepping back just to stay safe. For many farm owners, this was a shock they never saw coming. They believed that longtime trusted workers would stick around. But reality hit hard. When trust isn't backed by protection, no job is worth risking your safety. The American Farm Bureau Federation reported a 19% spike in cancellations of temporary labor contracts in just the first 60 days of 2025. Between processing delays and the looming threat of workplace raids, many workers walked away right in the middle of harvest season, hiring American-born labor as a backup. That idea failed fast. Jerry Spencer, who runs a farm in Hidalgo County, told KSAN News, "We brought in some unemployed Americans. Most quit after 2 weeks. Some didn't know how to cut vegetables, others couldn't take the heat. I just stood in the field and sighed." It wasn't just the lack of manpower. The sudden labor gap threw off entire harvest and post-harvest schedules. Crops like broccoli, lettuce, and tomatoes lose commercial value fast if not picked at the right time. Every delayed week costs rural communities millions of dollars, and all that's left behind is agricultural waste. This shortage is more than logistical, it's emotional. A survey by Texas Rural Voices found that nearly 60% of 150 farmers in Hidalgo, Cameron, and Starr counties said they felt suffocated by the very system they once trusted. It's not rage, they're just lost. One 52-year-old farmer who asked to remain anonymous said, "We followed the rules. We did everything right. Now, I don't even know what to believe anymore." The most alarming part, this crisis wasn't caused by drought or recession, it was a policy disaster. No backup plans, no phased transitions, no clear distinctions between worker categories. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of acres continue to ripen and rot in silence. Fields that once symbolized stability now stand as undeniable proof without labor. There's nothing for America to put on the dinner table. Exports vanished, and so did America's place in the global market. Every time a farmer plants a crop, they're not just betting on a good harvest, they're betting on someone being there to buy it. But in 2025, that trust was shattered by a cold, undeniable truth. America's biggest export markets, especially China, have all but disappeared. According to data released by the USDA in April 2025, U.S. soybean exports to China dropped by over 88% year over year, falling to what analysts are calling functionally zero. Corn and pork weren't spared either, down 67% and 73% respectively. This collapse followed a series of long-term trade deals Beijing signed with Brazil and Argentina, which included not just agricultural commodities, but also deep investments in infrastructure, private ports, storage facilities, and exclusive transport routes. On paper, it's just fallout from years of unresolved trade tensions and shifting policies since the pandemic. But for American farmers, this isn't theory. It's a knife to the heart of a business model that's kept families afloat for 3 generations. At a state agricultural hearing in Iowa this past March, Chuck Brigham, a soybean farmer managing over 800 acres, put it plainly, "They weren't just buyers. They were the reason I had the confidence to borrow and expand." From 2012 to 2021, China accounted for more than 60% of U.S. soybean exports. They bought in bulk, paid fast, and stuck to seasonal cycles. For American farmers, that stability wasn't just convenient, it was essential. It allowed them to plan ahead, invest in better equipment, hire seasonal labor, and send their kids to college. But when China pivoted to sourcing from South America, where production costs are lower and tariffs non-existent, the entire export-dependent model of U.S. agriculture crumbled in less than a year. According to a Bloomberg Agritrade report, losing China wasn't just about losing revenue, it was about losing global pricing power. Brazil, now supplying over 60% of Asia's soybeans, has become the new benchmark for price setting. The US, weighed down by higher production costs and limited trade leverage, can't keep up. Losing that buyer didn't just mean lost profit. It meant losing the very roadmap farmers had used for decades. Massive silos built to store export-ready corn now sit full, waiting for a domestic buyer, any buyer willing to take the crop at a steep discount. Many have been forced to sell at a 40% loss to domestic distributors just to cover insurance premiums and stay out of bankruptcy court. Others have opted to stop planting altogether. In Des Moines, applications for the Federal Conservation Reserve Program, essentially paying farmers not to farm, rose by over 20% compared to 2024. And farmers know even if the trade tensions are resolved, those customers aren't coming back. China has new partners, new supply chains, and new strategies. In global trade, trust and consistency are currencies that can't be bought back, not even with cash. For much of the Midwest, the region that once proudly called itself the breadbasket of the world, the most painful loss hasn't been the harvest itself. It's the loss of identity, the quiet realization that the world may no longer be waiting for what they grow. The psychological shock of the faithful. In the heartland of America, there used to be one thing you could count on. Farmers were the bedrock of the conservative movement. They proudly embraced America, first supported tougher immigration policies, believed in strong borders, and trusted that aggressive trade measures would put American agriculture back on top. But in 2025, that faith is being shaken to its core, because when the very policies they once believed in begin breaking their farms apart, what are they supposed to believe in now? At a Missouri State Agriculture Board hearing in April, 62-year-old farmer Donald Lesmeister spoke with brutal honesty. I used to think cracking down on immigration wouldn't touch my farm, but now I can't find a single person to hire. And I'm starting to wonder, am I the victim of the very thing I supported? There's no betrayal more painful than being shut out of the dream you helped build. For many farmers, agriculture isn't just work, it's pride, self-reliance, identity. But when export markets collapse, labor disappears, and operational costs skyrocket due to fractured supply chains, those symbols of American grit suddenly feel hollow. A confidential report released by the National Farmers Union in early June 2025 revealed that among farmers who previously supported hardline trade and immigration policies, over 41% now say they're no longer confident in those choices. That's a massive jump from just 3 years ago, signaling a seismic shift in how core rural voters are rethinking their trust. But it's not just regret, it's something deeper, the feeling of being misled. Many believed immigration crackdowns would only target others criminals or undocumented workers in big cities. They never imagined the farmhands who'd worked alongside them for years, many of whom paid taxes and held legal status, would be caught in the crossfire. When ICE raids began sweeping through rural counties without distinction between newcomers and longtime workers, a painful question echoed through the farming community. Were we even part of the plan, or just collateral damage? This sense of betrayal doesn't come from headlines. It comes from the empty tractor lot, the packing shed with no one to load. Produce the son who drops out of college to help save the farm, and the letter from the bank warning that the debt ceiling has been reached. At a town hall in North Dakota, Karen Schmidt, who runs a wheat co-op, spoke through tears. We're not asking for bailouts. We just want to farm like we used to. But everything we knew is gone. This isn't just an economic loss, it's a cultural one. People who once stood tall and said, I'm an American farmer, I feed this country, now feel like they've been pushed to the margins. No one's listening. No one's explaining. And a quiet, heartbreaking question is taking root. Were we just political props, used, then discarded? That's why from Iowa to Kentucky, community meetings are popping up. Not to talk about crops, but to ask something deeper. Who are we in today's America? And is anyone still listening to the people who put food on the nation's table? The Domino Effect. How rural economies are crumbling, layer by layer. From a satellite view, the town of Spencer, Iowa looks like any other small Midwestern community. Low-slung houses, a high school, a grocery store, a modest church, and endless rows of soybean fields stretching to the horizon. But if you take a walk down Main Street in June 2025, the picture shifts. Storefronts are shuttered. For lease signs line the windows. The parking lot at the corn processing plant sits empty. When farming stops, everything else begins to unravel. According to a May report from the Rural Midwest Economic Association, every farm bankruptcy leads to the loss of 7 to 12 additional jobs in the surrounding supply chain. We're not just talking about farmers, we're talking about truck drivers, packing plant workers, local mechanics, seed suppliers, fast food cashiers, even the cleaning staff at motels along the highway. The collapse spreads like a chain reaction. A farmer skips planting season. The plant doesn't get raw materials. Workers are cut. Restaurants near the plant lose customers. The local grocer sees a dip in sales. The town bank pulls back on small business loans. One crack leads to another until the gears of the local economy grind to a halt. With no product to process, many co-ops have stopped ordering fertilizer and seed, forcing agriculture supply stores to lay off staff or shut down entirely. The National Agribusiness Suppliers Association reports that temporary and permanent closures among AG retail businesses rose 21% in Q1 of 2025 alone. Healthcare in rural America, already fragile, is next in line. A regional hospital in west central Illinois slashed its workforce by 18% in May after a sharp drop in revenue from farm-based insurance plans. In Ohio, independent pharmacies say sales are down nearly 30% as families start skipping prescriptions to save money. It gets worse. As jobs vanish and the future dims, young people keep leaving. Students who go off to college don't return. Schools shrink. Libraries shorten their hours. The fall fairs, once a beloved tradition, are quietly canceled one by one. No one's protesting. There are no rallies, no speeches, no headlines. Just small towns fading in silence. And it all begins with one seemingly isolated fact: the farmer didn't plant this season. Rural America, built on self-reliance, tight-knit communities, and the cycle of local production and consumption, is becoming the clearest casualty of a supply chain that's falling apart. Not because of any one bad policy, but because of a failure to see the bigger picture. A farm isn't just where food is grown, it's the anchor of an entire way of life. And when that anchor is lost, so goes the town around it. It's not just about losing money, it's about losing the next generation. An empty field can be replanted next season. A tractor sold in hard times can be bought back when things get better. But a child who walks away from the farm, they rarely come back. And that's what hurts American farmers most in 2025. For generations, farming wasn't just a job, it was a legacy. In places like Iowa, Minnesota, and Indiana, family farms have survived for 80, even 100 years. But now more and more parents are facing a painful truth: their kids don't want to take over. And with the collapse of supply chains and export markets, the wave of leaving the land is growing faster than ever. According to a May 2025 survey from the Land-Grant University Alliance, nearly 61% of agriculture students at state universities said they had no plans to return to the farm even if they inherited the land. That's double the number from 2018, and it's not because they're lazy. Most say they simply don't believe farming in America is sustainable anymore. A separate report from the Young Farmers Coalition shows that the percentage of farmers under 35 has fallen to the lowest level in 3 decades. Meanwhile, real estate platform Farmland Finder reports an 18% jump in family farm listings during the first half of 2025. And the stories behind those numbers all sound painfully familiar: aging parents overwhelmed by debt and children unwilling to spend their lives chasing stability that never comes. The heartbreak isn't just about losing a helping hand. It's about losing the belief that the land will be cared for when they're gone. In rural America, the most sacred thing isn't how many acres you own or how new your equipment is. It's the wooden sign hanging at the entrance: Farm Est, 1947, Halverson family. Without a successor, every financial decision becomes riskier. Many older farmers admit they're afraid to take out loans for upgrades because they know there's no one to carry the debt if they get sick or worse. That fear leads to stalled investment, lower yields, shrinking competitiveness, and fewer reasons for their children to return home. Yes, federal programs like New Farmers still exist, but most are tailored for small-scale local market farming. Meanwhile, mid and large-size operations already buried in debt and dependent on exports are finding fewer young people who are willing, able, or hopeful enough to take over. The next generation isn't just labor, they're the soul of agriculture. Lose them and we lose more than people. We lose continuity, we lose passion, we lose the living memory that once tied families to their land and kept America's heartland beating. Can bailouts fix what trust has already broken? As American agriculture slid into crisis in 2025, the federal government's first response was to roll out relief packages. The USDA quickly announced a $12 billion support program dispersed in multiple rounds, with priority given to hard-hit Midwest states, those suffering most from stalled exports and labor shortages. But between the numbers on paper and the messy reality on the ground, there's a growing gap, a gap where trust is eroding by the day. According to a June 2025 report from the Government Accountability Office, only about 38% of mid-sized farms had fully and timely access to federal aid. A maze of paperwork, confusing eligibility rules, and overlapping regulations caused many farmers to give up entirely, not because they didn't qualify, but because they lacked the time, legal help, or energy to complete the process. For those who did receive funds, many say the money was barely enough to keep the lights on for a few weeks. It couldn't even begin to cover the months of losses. Fertilizer prices had jumped over 40% compared to mid-2024. Crop insurance premiums were hiked, citing elevated risk. Meanwhile, bank loans were coming due without any built-in grace period tied to the aid packages. But beyond the numbers, the bigger problem is structural. Financial assistance can't solve a broken system. When export markets vanish, faith in the global value chain collapses. When labor disappears, access to capital becomes irrelevant. Farmers don't just need to survive this season. They need a roadmap, a clear long-term plan for the next 3 years, the next 5, along with stability in trade, immigration, and domestic distribution policies. Even worse, how the aid was distributed sparked frustration. An analysis from the Environmental Working Group revealed that 60% of the first-round funding went to large-scale industrial farms, while more than half of small and mid-sized farmers received less than $5,000. The outrage this triggered wasn't just personal. It became collective, a shared sense that family farms are being left behind. Many farmers now compare today's crisis to the Great Depression of the 1930s, when federal relief was also slow and uneven. But there's one major difference. Back then, people still believed their country was trying. Today, that belief is slipping away. Money can help cover bills, but it can't buy back lost trust. It can't bring home a generation that's already walked away. It can't rebuild a supply chain that's fallen apart. And it sure as hell can't restore a farmer's pride, not when they have to wait for government checks each month instead of feeding their families with the fruits of their own land. For a profession rooted in self-reliance, that's the real heartbreak. Not the drought, not the debt, but the quiet fear that maybe the system has already moved on without them. America's food chain is fracturing. Who will feed the nation. The farmers can't plant, the processors can't process, the trucks can't haul, and the supermarkets can't keep the shelves full. That's how Paul Wisniewski, a Midwest food distribution director, summed up the quiet chaos creeping into America's national food system in 2025. And as blunt as it sounds, his words are proving disturbingly accurate. Since the start of the year, multiple reports from the USDA and market analysts have pointed to a steady breakdown in domestic food supply, especially for fresh produce and raw goods. In the first quarter alone, delayed shipments from regional food warehouses to retail outlets jumped 26%, the highest disruption level since the COVID-19 pandemic. But this isn't just a local problem. It's a full-blown systemic failure. Farms without labor harvests, without buyers, cold storage, reaching capacity factories short on workers, and trucks without drivers. It's not a crash, you hear. It's a slow grinding jam, one that makes store shelves go half empty by 4 p.m. instead of 8 p.m. In over 30 counties across Georgia, school meal programs have already reduced portions due to a shortage of ingredients from now disrupted local suppliers. Meanwhile, in southern Illinois, a fresh food chain has canceled contracts with 7 small producers, citing harvest shortfalls and unreliable delivery. What's terrifying is that this didn't happen overnight. It's been building quietly, link by link, decision by decision, until the entire supply chain no longer works like it used to. And this isn't just hurting farmers. Consumers in cities are now feeling the pinch. Fresh produce prices are inching up steadily, and grocery chains in Los Angeles and New York have started rationing certain U.S.-grown items. According to the Department of Labor, food prices in May 2025 rose 1.9% from the previous month, the sharpest monthly increase so far this year. For working-class families, seniors, and those on fixed incomes, that's not just an inconvenience, it's a burden. Frustration is mounting online. On community forums across Texas, Ohio, and Michigan, people are posting comments like, "Prices are higher, shelves are thinner," but no one's talking about what's happening on the farms. And maybe that's the biggest irony of all. America once prided itself on having the most stable food system in the world, but that system is starting to shake, not because of war or natural disasters, but because of breakdowns from within. The question now isn't just can farmers survive, it's this: who's going to feed America 6 months from now, if the fields stay empty and the roads from farm to table remain broken. Adapt or collapse. Farmers are starting to push back. America has long prided itself on having a modern, resilient food system, one that could feed its people through war crisis or recession. But 2025 is testing that belief, not with empty shelves overnight, but with quiet breakdowns growing day by day. In Fresno, California, one of the agricultural powerhouses of the U.S., hundreds of thousands of tons of tomatoes, broccoli, and cucumbers are being planted as usual. But according to the California Farm Bureau, over 28% of spring harvested vegetables never left the farms on time. Why not enough truck drivers? Not enough containers? Not enough wholesale contracts from retail chains? The result, tons of produce spoiled on conveyor belts, while just 300 miles away, families in urban neighborhoods paid double for imported food. This isn't just the farmer's problem anymore. It's yours too, the person pushing a cart down the grocery aisle. In New Jersey, the ShopRite chain reported a 19% drop in locally sourced produce compared to last year, even though demand remained the same. The issue distribution hubs in Pennsylvania and Ohio are running at reduced capacity due to a labor shortage, especially among legal immigrant workers now afraid of random inspections. It's not just fresh produce. Zoals voor British work. Even packaged goods, deli meat, shelf-stable cheese, powdered milk are becoming subtly harder to find. It's the kind of scarcity that's easy to miss if you only shop occasionally, but painfully clear if you go every week. And shoppers are noticing. According to a June 2025 survey by Morning Consult, more than 48% of Americans over 50 said they've had to change their shopping habits in the past 3 months due to unreliable stock. That's not just bad news for grocery stores, it's a warning sign for policymakers too. The key word here is uncertainty. When folks in Dallas or Detroit can't find lettuce from Florida, or when beef from Texas costs more even though it's only a few hundred miles away, they might not know exactly why, but they sense something's broken, and that kind of silent panic is more dangerous than any government press release. Let's not forget the institutional buyers, schools, prisons, hospitals, places that depend on bulk low-cost farm contracts. In Colorado, over 21 schools have reported difficulty meeting fresh vegetable requirements for school meals, according to the Department of Education. There are still over 2 million farmers in America, but if the supply chain stops working, even the best grower can't feed the country. And consumers, people shopping every week, are starting to feel the cracks. When millions of Americans across dozens of states are changing what they eat, when they switch shopping hours just to find essentials, when families alter what's on the dinner table simply to adapt, then the question who feeds America stops being symbolic. It becomes a siren. Behind the collapse, a hard lesson in choices and consequences. Back in 2020, many American farmers stood in their fields and truly believed, that a single vote could shape a better future. A future where they'd be heard, protected, and placed at the heart of America's economic engine. But in 2025, those same farmers are working the land alone, no longer certain what their choices really bought them. No one questions the power of choice in a democracy. It's sacred, but choices carry consequences, sometimes slow, sometimes invisible, until they show up in the places that hurt the most. According to the National Farmers Union, more than 37% of small and mid-sized farmers in the Midwest now say they feel betrayed by trade and labor policies implemented after 2024. Cuts to key bilateral trade deals, coupled with tightened seasonal visa programs, have forced many to choose between shrinking their farms or going broke slowly. But for many, the deepest wound isn't financial. It's the bitter awakening that the political system, no matter the party, can't shield them from global market risks. And that farmers first is a phrase that shows up more in speeches than in federal budgets. This isn't just a political story. It's a story of awareness of reckoning. Farmers are beginning to see their votes not as a show of support, but as a gamble on who they're willing to risk everything for. The fallout: empty fields, empty grocery shelves, and children who don't want to come back home to a life of uncertainty. In Wisconsin, the Food and Agriculture Policy Research Institute, FAPRI, reports that an average of 48 small farms shut down or go up for sale every month, primarily due to aging owners with no successors or the inability to stay competitive. It's not front-page news, but it's a slow fracture in the rural backbone of America. Across agricultural forums, farmers are speaking up not to blame, but to be heard. They don't want campaign trail photo ops. They want long-term policy, not just a relief check. They want stable trade that lets them stand on their own. And perhaps the most painful lesson is this: in a democracy, voting is both a right and a responsibility. Every ballot doesn't just choose a leader, it chooses who bears the cost when things go wrong. Farming isn't just another industry. It's the spine of this country, quiet, steady, essential. And when that spine starts to crack, not with a bang, but with a million tiny fractures across every field, every delivery route, every empty seat at a farmer's dinner table, America can't stand tall for long. At this point, it's not just about crop prices or whether the next relief package is coming. It's about whether we as a nation have the courage to look directly at the consequences of our own decisions. Will the next vote be rooted in memory, reflection, and accountability, or just another round of wishful promises? If you've walked past an empty shelf, paid more for lettuce, or heard someone in your family say, "We can't afford another planting season," then this isn't someone else's story. This is yours. This video does not promote division or advocate for any form of secession. All content presented is for the purpose of exploration analysis and sparking informed discussion, based on real events, emotional realities, and social trends. We fully respect the Constitution of the United States and all federal laws. If this message resonated with you, leave a comment, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because we've got more untold stories that mainstream media has chosen to ignore.